Cur/curs comes from curra, the Latin verb meaning to run. Although words based on this root don't tend to suggest speed, the sense of movement remains. Current, for instance, refers to running water in a stream or river, or electrons running through a wire, and an excursion is a trip from one place to another. Concurrent, happening or operating at the same time. The killer was sentenced to serve 3 concurrent life terms in prison. Things that are concurrent usually not only happen at the same time, but also are similar to each other. So, for example, multitasking computers are capable of performing concurrent tasks. When we take more than one medication at a time, we run the risks involved with concurrent drug use. And at any multiplex theater, several movies are running concurrently. Cursory, hastily and often carelessly done. Having spent the weekend going to parties, she had only given the chapter a cursory reading before class on Monday. Unlike the other words in this section, cursory always implies speed. But it also stresses a lack of attention to detail. Cursory observations are generally shallow or superficial because of their speed. And when citizens complain about a cursory police investigation of a crime, they're distressed by its lack of thoroughness, not its speed. Discursive, passing from one topic to another. Some days he allowed himself to write long discursive essays in his diary instead of his usual simple reporting of the day's events. The Latin verb discurre meant to run about, and from this word we get our word discursive, which often means rambling about over a wide range of topics. A discursive writing style generally isn't encouraged by writing teachers. But some of the great 19th century writers, such as Charles Lamb and Thomas de Quincey, show that the discursive essay, especially when gracefully written and somewhat personal in tone, can be a pleasure to read. And the man often called the inventor of the essay, the great Michel de Montaigne, might touch on dozens of different topics in the course of a long discursive essay. Precursor, one that goes before and indicates the coming of another. Scientists are trying to identify special geological activity that may be a precursor to an earthquake, which will help them predict the quake's size, time, and location. With its prefix pre, meaning before, a precursor is literally a forerunner, and in fact forerunner first appeared as the translation of the Latin precursor. But the two words function a little differently today. A forerunner may simply come before another thing, but a precursor generally paves the way for something. So, for example, the Office of Strategic Services in World War II was the immediate precursor of today's Central Intelligence Agency, while the blues music of the 1930s and 1940s was only one of the precursors of the rock and roll of today. Ped comes from the Latin word for foot. A pedal is pushed by the foot, a pedicure is a treatment of the feet, toes, and toenails, and a pedestal is what a statue stands on, in a sense, its foot. Quadruped, an animal having 4 feet. She always tells her friends that their farm has 5 kinds of quadrupeds: sheep, goats, cows, horses, and pigs. The quadrupeds include almost all the mammals. Among the exceptions are whales, bats, and humans. The Greek equivalent of this Latin word is tetrapod. However, the two are not identical, since the tetrapod classification includes bipeds such as birds, in which 2 of the limbs are no longer used for walking. Insects all have 6 legs, of course, and in the sea there are 8-legged octopods, including the octopus. But there are no animals of any kind with an odd number of legs. Pedigree, the line of ancestors of a person or animal. She talks a lot about her pedigree, but never mentions that a couple of her uncles spent time in prison. What does someone's ancestry have to do with feet? Because someone once thought that a family tree, or genealogical chart, resembled a crane's foot, in French, pied de grue, even though crane's feet only have 4 talons or claws, no more than any other bird, while a family tree may have hundreds of branches. The word pedigree is usually used for purebred animals, cats, racehorses, and dogs, as well as livestock such as cows and sheep. Some people continue to believe that purity in human family trees is a good thing as well, though most of us find the idea a little creepy. Impediment, something that interferes with movement or progress. Her poorly developed verbal ability was the most serious impediment to her advancement. Impediment comes from a Latin verb that meant to interfere with or to get in the way of progress, as if by tripping up the feet of someone walking. In English, impediment still suggests an obstruction or obstacle along a path. For example, a lack of adequate roads and bridges would be called an impediment to economic development. Impediments usually get in the way of something we want. So we may speak of an impediment to communication, marriage, or progress, but something that slows the progress of aging, disease, or decay is rarely called an impediment. Pedestrian, commonplace, ordinary, or unimaginative. While politicians endlessly discussed the great issues facing Russia, the Russians worried about such pedestrian concerns as finding enough food, shelter, and clothing. Most of us know pedestrian as a noun meaning someone who travels on foot. But the adjective sense of pedestrian as defined here is actually its original meaning. To be pedestrian was to be drab or dull, as if plodding along on foot rather than speeding on horseback or by coach. Pedestrian is often used to describe a colorless or lifeless writing style, but it can also describe politicians, public tastes, personal qualities, or possessions. In comparison with the elaborate stage shows put on by today's rock artists, for instance, most of the stage presentations of 1960s rock stars seem pedestrian.